Why does housing cost so much in California? It's because of policy choices. It's always because of policy choices. One thing that's happened is that developers are hit with these huge fees, and they have to recoup the cost of the fees, which can be tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars for each door that they're building, each home, each apartment, and that is passed through in the price of housing. So that's one reason, is that local governments and state government are really hammering everyone who builds housing with a lot of development fees. But the bigger problem is that we have an imaginary line around our cities, which is called the urban boundary. And this is a climate policy. The idea is that you should not commute a long distance to work. So in order to prevent people from commuting a long distance to work, we have prevented developers from building housing in outlying areas. This is enforced through what they call vehicle miles traveled, which is now an impact under the CEQA Act. CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act, which dates back to 1970. And if something is an impact on the environment, then it has to be mitigated or it has to be prohibited. And so vehicle miles traveled has been added as an impact under CEQA. The basic outline of how these restrictions work is if something is determined to have an impact under CEQA, you have to mitigate the impact. Well, how do you mitigate the impact? Now we're into a negotiation. Maybe you fund something in another community that supposedly offsets the greenhouse gas emissions that supposedly you're creating with your housing project. So it's a long negotiation, and it involves lawyers, and it involves environmental consultants, and it involves environmental impact reports. But the short answer is, whatever they do with it, it makes it more expensive. Because if a developer will be allowed to build something only if they spend a small fortune building something else, who's going to pay that? It's going to be passed through to the home buyers. And that also contributes to the high cost of housing, all those mitigation requirements. The effect of this is that it has made it impossible to build housing in outlying communities. So instead of building what many people want to buy, which is a single-family home with a driveway for the basketball hoop, with a yard for the dog, instead of building single-family homes, the government is trying to incentivize high-density apartment construction on top of existing neighborhoods. So they're trying to densify existing single-family neighborhoods, first by authorizing extra units of housing, so-called granny flats or ADUs, accessory dwelling units. That's now the law, that you can build that by right in California. And you can build two of them. You can convert a garage and build a house in the backyard. And there's no requirement to provide parking. There's no requirement to allow for funding for new services or infrastructure that's needed. That's just assumed that at some point in the future, taxes will be raised to pay for that. That's just part of the assumption. It's not part of the law. The law says you can just build it. Well, what else can you build? You can split the lot, and you can have two houses by right and two ADUs. Behind those two houses, you can have 4 households on a single-family lot. That was Senate Bill 9. These are policy choices moving toward density. Putting in transit lines so that you can have extra density within half a mile of the transit lines, or even within half a mile of a bus stop, or even within half a mile of a planned transit line that hasn't been built yet. That's encouraged. Build high density, build these big cube-looking apartment buildings right next to single-family neighborhoods, or even within single-family neighborhoods in some cases. Senate Bill 10 said that you could knock down, if a city wanted to, they could pass an ordinance that allowed people to knock down a single-family home and put up a 10-unit apartment building on what was one home, one single-family home. And you could do that if a city authorized it anywhere within half a mile of transit as defined once again as a bus stop with frequent service. So this is the policy choice to create density. Do people push back against it? You bet they do. When people invest their life savings and their life's earnings to buy a single-family home in a low-density area, they're pretty upset if somebody comes in and starts building apartment towers right next to their house. They're pretty upset, and they fight against that. And so nothing gets built. We have all this housing that doesn't get built. The governor is suing some of the cities for not doing it. That's not the answer. Suing the city governments for not densifying where they're already as dense as they need to be. They're already fully built out, and they don't want more density and more traffic and more infrastructure costs and all of that. They don't want that, so they don't do it. So the governor is suing cities like Huntington Beach for not doing it. Well, that's not the solution. The solution is drop the urban boundary and build housing where it makes sense, where people want to buy it, build the kind of housing that people want to buy. The private market can fix this if the government stops prohibiting the private market from fixing it. So vehicle miles traveled is an archaic, at this point, an archaic restriction on building housing in California. It's archaic because people can work at home, because everything is different than it was when they thought of this. It's not necessary to restrict people from driving. It's just not necessary. And it's not helpful if restricting people from driving is preventing housing construction. That causes more problems than you're attempting to solve. If people can't buy housing in California, they have to leave the state because they can't afford to live here. And you have homelessness. And you have people doubled up in apartment buildings. So you have two families living where a unit was intended for one family. And that densifies the neighborhood in another way, which is affecting everyone's quality of life. This is not a policy that we should be proud of in California. Vehicle miles traveled should go. We don't need that as an impact under CEQA. We should be building housing where it makes sense in neighborhoods that are new communities so that people can breathe and live and own homes, which, by the way, is the path to building generational wealth in every community. You don't want people to be renters all their lives. They'll never get ahead that way. You want people to be able to enjoy savings, equity, ownership, the flexible financial arrangements that can be made. If you need to borrow against it, if you need a reverse mortgage, you have something, you have equity. And that's really important for people in California. And it's being lost. And why are we losing it? Because somebody thinks it's bad for the climate to have people drive to work. It's not bad for the climate. What's bad for the climate is the business climate in California. That's what's bad. The business climate that's driving companies away because people can't work and live in California. They can't afford to. So businesses are picking up and they're going to Texas and Florida and other states. And taxes are lower and costs are lower and people are happier. And why isn't California doing that? Why are we sticking with these policies that are harming people? Short term, long term, generation after generation. Why are we doing this? Let's just fix it. Let's just drop the urban boundary and build housing. We should not see housing as a bad thing. We shouldn't be penalizing people for building housing. We shouldn't be treating it like some sort of a crime where there has to be a probation agreement. This is a good thing to have people build housing that people want to buy and to help people with financing if they can't make it on their own, to guarantee financing for people who are working but maybe just need that extra help that people got after World War II. We had a terrible housing shortage after World War II in the United States. How was it solved? It was solved by building new communities and helping people with financing. It wasn't solved with public housing. It wasn't solved with dense apartments. It was solved with single-family homes in new communities. That's what did it. And we could do that again.
If you haven't checked out CaliforniaInsider.com, we highly recommend you do that now because we're going to have a lot of news and videos there. And on top of what we have there right now, we are building a really big platform to cover what's happening in California so you can be informed. We're going to have more shows, more videos from all aspects of life in California. Go to CaliforniaInsider.com and we'll see you there.